This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Vanessa Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. A new wave of intense Israeli strikes is underway inside Iran right now. Day 5 of the joint US-Israeli operation against the Islamic regime, taking out missile launches and strategic sites belonging to the world's biggest sponsor of terror, a regime with US and Israeli blood on its hands. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the US is just getting started. The strikes triggering the expected retaliatory attacks on Israel and the far more unexpected spate of attacks on neighboring Gulf states, sparking much concern across the region. The key Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut off, with the regime vowing to set vessels alight. A range of developments on this day. A US submarine sinking an Iranian warship in international waters off the coast of Sri Lanka. Turkey is now in the mix, with NATO air defense systems shooting down an Iranian missile that was traveling towards Ankara's airspace. The first time NATO forces have intercepted an Iranian missile traveling towards a member country's airspace in this war. President Donald Trump praising the unprecedented joint operation, claiming Iran's military installations had been knocked out from its Navy to its Air Force and more. Here's the latest from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
We've seen those reports as well, of course, and this is something that our intelligence agencies are closely monitoring and looking at. The truth is, we'll have to wait and see. The president has said repeatedly that the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are the 4 military objectives that I laid out for you previously: to destroy Iran's navy, to destroy their ballistic missile capacity, to ensure their proxies in the region can no longer harm Americans, and to also ensure that they can never obtain a nuclear weapon. As for what comes next for Iran, the president has said, of course, it's a good thing for the United States to want freedom for the Iranian people, and ultimately we hope that freedom rests in their hands.
So many developments unfolding all at once. For more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and the former IDF International Spokesperson, our Senior Middle East Correspondent, Ariel Osaran, and Senior Correspondent, Owen Altman. Gentlemen, thank you so much. There is much on the go, all unfolding at once, but I want to start with an exclusive I-24 News report. Ariel Osaran, you've got the details. What can you tell us?
Yes, so really groundbreaking reporting by our senior producer, Yulia Pobegailova, indicating that Kurdish forces that are currently based in Iraq have launched a ground offensive into Iranian territory. This began already on Monday. We're talking about thousands of Kurdish forces crossing the border, taking offensive, positions in the mountainous area of Marwan. This is the mountainous range really on the border between Iran and Iraq. This is based on information from an official from the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. These thousands of Kurdish fighters, mainly from the Pejak, these are Iranian Kurds who have fled into Iraq, trained for this moment exactly, and have now launched their offensive into Iranian territory. And as we speak, there's reports of intense airstrikes on IRGC positions in Marwan, which would indicate coordination between the Kurdish forces and whoever is striking those positions, be they American or Israeli forces. You know, throughout these past couple of days, there have been numerous reports of coordination between the Trump administration and Kurdish forces in Iraq, including direct conversations between President Trump and Kurdish leaders. Coinciding with that, there is also a phone call between the Iranian foreign minister and the president of Iraqi Kurdistan, warning against any operation along the border between Iran and Iraq. And so we are seeing right now that ground offensive has already begun.
Hugely significant indeed. Kurdish forces start movements against Iran. Jonathan Conricus, your take on exactly that, the significance of a move like this and the timing right now?
Well, it's obviously designed to apply pressure on the Iranian regime. It is to signal to the Iranian regime that there will be pressure coming from various locations, from various ethnic groups. To put things into historic perspective, the Kurds are a large minority in Iran, but they're not the only large minority. Like them, there are the Baluchis in the southeast, the Azeris in the northeast, and other big ethnic groups that probably already are in some stages of similar development. I think we could assess this ahead of time that the Kurds would be first because they are by far the most organized and they have a history of bearing arms and fighting for themselves. And I think this is designed mostly by the US to apply pressure on the regime. Now, to put it to contain it a little bit, I think we shouldn't expect things that the Kurds are not capable of. This isn't an expeditionary force. They do not have the logistics or the manpower or the skill or technology to maneuver across lots of terrain and to present a military threat on Tehran or other centers of gravity of the Iranian regime. But definitely it will present pressure, and it will perhaps bring or motivate other groups in Iran to do the same thing, again, with the desired outcome to apply pressure on the regime. Now, the big question is, how will the Iranian regime respond? Will they respond by lashing out and actually engaging, allocating resources and fighting and with a lot of stress to it? Or will they make the smarter decision, kind of contain the situation and try to focus on other things that they have that are more burning? So far, the Iranian regime hasn't really managed this operation very well, so it'll be very interesting to see how they respond to this new threat.
Certainly is a fascinating development. Very briefly, Owen Altman, characterize for us the relationship right now between Israel and the Kurds. Historically, give us a sense of the importance of this moment.
There's an enormous amount of affinity in Israel for the Kurds, and has been for years, but also been an enormous amount of affinity in Israel for the Iranian people, especially for Iranian activists outside in the diaspora, but obviously for the bravery of those Iranians still in Iran and with whom we can't communicate obviously as easily. And that, I think, is the opportunity for the regime and potentially the dilemma for Israel. A lot of mainstream Iranians are very, very worried. We hear this from all of the Iran experts here in Israel and beyond, by the idea of a failed state, the idea of Iran breaking apart along ethnic lines, and are going to be very, very nervous tonight reading this report. This is an opportunity for the regime to try to drive a wedge between parts of the coalition, between the activists in the streets and in the diaspora on one hand, and the ethnic groups on the other. It's an opportunity in terms of public diplomacy for the regime with its own people and beyond, and a huge dilemma, not now, but over the course of the next few days and weeks for the Israeli public, for Israeli society, and for the Israeli government and for military planners, between these two very different groups who both want to see the back of this regime, but have a very, very different idea potentially about what the day after looks like.
Certainly is going to be fascinating, a massive development unfolding as we speak. That update, those details from our Yulia Pobogalova, an exclusive report from I24 News senior reporter Yulia Pobogalova. Thank you. Much more reaction to come in the coming hours. And now for more, let's turn our attention to the latest out of Washington. We cross live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from the White House. So much on the go behind you. We know there's a strong muscle flex coming out of the White House, vowing to strike deeper into Iran as war spreads across the region. Pete Hegseth saying earlier they're just getting started. He also says Iran is toast. Tell us more. What is the latest there?
Toast, and they know it, or they will know it soon, were the words of Pete Hegseth. We heard a little while ago here at the White House from Trump spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt, fielding questions again about the impetus for the war, how the president came about the decision to go attack Iran before she says they could attack the United States. Caroline Leavitt laying it out, saying that Trump does not make decisions in a vacuum. The decision to launch this particular operation was based on what she said is a cumulative effect of various direct threats that Iran posed to the United States of America. She said he had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets and personnel in the region. Didn't exactly state what that feeling was based on. She said it was based on a number of circumstances, a cumulative effect, but I'm not quite sure she's answered the questions that still linger. Some other things coming out of that particular briefing with Caroline Leavitt today. She talked a little bit about the State Department's effort to evacuate Americans from the Middle East. That effort is continuing. Some 17,000 Americans have departed the Middle East on direct flights, but those were by themselves. Those weren't necessarily with the help of the State Department, but the State Department said today they've been in touch with 6,500 or so Americans throughout the region individually, trying to make plans to get them where they need to be in order to get out when the opportunity presents itself. There's still no word on if any charter flights have actually landed in the Middle East, courtesy of America, to get citizens out. As of this afternoon, no charter flights had landed. It seems the State Department behind the ball on this one. Meanwhile, very interesting going on with Spain right now. Spain has been under pressure from the U.S. to allow the use of their military bases there for American flights and operations. Spanish President Pedro Sanchez has said no. By the way, Sanchez obviously no fan of Israel, which is part of the reason for it. The Americans have been pressuring Sanchez. Caroline Leavitt said Spain agreed. They capitulated. Spanish, 10 minutes later, said, I don't think so. And he said there's no deal to be had. We're waiting on confirmation on who's right and how the wires actually got crossed. By the way, speaking to our exclusive report earlier, Leavitt did say that Trump was in touch with Kurdish leaders. However, he has not made the decision yet to arm them. That's according to Caroline Leavitt here at the White House.
New developments on that story coming up later on in this broadcast. But Mike, give us a sense of where things stand with that Senate decision to vote on whether to consider a resolution that would limit Donald Trump's ability to continue military action in Iran without congressional approval. Where do things stand? What is the latest?
Oh, there'll be a vote in the Senate, and eventually there'll be a vote in the House, and neither one of them is going to pass, but it will be interesting. I think important, A, to have the debate, because it's a debate that should be had within the halls of Congress when you're talking about major military action. But B, I think the major thing that's going to come out of those debates and the vote is where Republicans stand. We know Democrats, maybe except for a scattered few, are against this military operation, especially in the Senate. But if you look at maybe moderate Republicans, how much concern, how much criticism are they going to voice in the actual debate itself, and how many of them are going to turn that criticism and possible anger into a vote against the resolutions? There doesn't seem to be enough to actually defeat, or rather pass, the resolution that's being floated by Democrats. But the numbers themselves, I think, are going to tell a story about how much support Donald Trump actually has within the party as this war against Iran continues.
Live from Washington, thank you so much to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, at the White House. More to come from Mike, of course, in the coming hours. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, your take on the developments unfolding as we speak. We turn our focus specifically to Tehran. Intense strikes continue. Of course, the stunning development early on day one, the elimination of the supreme leader, more than 40 Iranian commanders, and right now, more intense strikes continue as we speak. Your take on the success so far of this joint Israeli-U.S. operation?
So, what the IDF and the Americans, but I'll speak more about what Israel is doing, is focusing on a few different types of targets. Priority number one still is, and I think will continue to be until complete destruction, are the missile launchers. That is what the Israeli Air Force is actively hunting. Whenever the Iranians fire, that indicates their location, and then that area and that target is immediately attacked, or it's part of the target bank and hunted for the future. That, of course, has the biggest influence on the overall regional picture, and that influences Israeli civilians the most, and hence the importance. That's number one. Parallel to that, and by the way, the success is quite good. We've heard assessments from both the Americans and Israelis that high number of missile launchers, and a very high percentage of missiles have indeed either been taken out or already fired. So that's one. Two, and perhaps more interesting in telling about the real intentions that Israel has, is that for the last day and a half, almost 2 days, Israel has been striking regime targets, proper regime targets in Tehran. Nothing really to do with their military capacity to manage operations, or little to do, more to do with oppressing the Iranian people. And that sends a very strong message, I think, is intended to send a message to the Iranian people and to others that Israel is indeed fulfilling that promise of actually paving the way or opening up the space for the Iranian people to eventually take to the streets when the time is right and after the Israelis will have loosened up the area a bit. So those are two important parts. The Americans, I think, are focusing mostly on the southern part of the country, on the naval aspect, the whole Hormuz area, with significant success. I wouldn't say that it's done because, as you reported in the beginning, the Iranians have declared the area closed and we see very limited traffic, if at all. So that's still an effort that is ongoing. But all in all, I would assess that the success is significant. Israel and the US now dominate the Iranian skies, except for very few pockets of areas. Are able now to use munitions that are less expensive, less sophisticated, because our aircraft are able to be above target, what we call stand-in, as opposed to stand-off, where you have to use different weapons, and that is significant. Last thing, which I think a lot of people who have an interest in undermining the war efforts of Israel and the US is counting interceptors and munitions. To summarize it, I would much rather be on the side of an imperial giant or industrial giant like Israel and US than on the Iranian side. They have real issues with resupply, no ability to manufacture, no real ability to import. So if anybody's going to run out of missiles or munitions, I bet it's the Iranians.
And no one really in charge right now, which is something we're going to discuss a little bit later on in the broadcast. Gentlemen, stay with us as we ask the question, how would you imagine Ankara might respond to an Iranian missile heading towards its airspace? A hugely surprising development. Well, NATO air defense systems shooting down the missile. So this is the first time that NATO forces have intercepted a missile traveling towards a member country's airspace since this war started. So here's the reaction from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Take a listen.
As in this morning's incident, we are taking all kinds of precautions in close consultation with our NATO allies, and we are making the necessary intervention immediately. We are giving warnings in the clearest way possible for similar incidents not to occur again.
So for more, we bring in security analyst Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast, The Lapin Assessment. He joins us now from Rehovot. So Yaakov, we just heard there Recep Tayyip Erdogan responding with a very delicate diplomatic stance, given that an Iranian missile was heading towards his airspace. Turkey may not have been the intended target, but it certainly shows how quickly things are spiraling across the region. Your assessment from a security perspective.
Yeah, it does appear, and Turkish officials are reportedly assessing that this missile was on its way to Cyprus, probably targeting that same British base that Hezbollah had reportedly targeted a few days ago with a drone. And sure, listen, the Iranians are firing missiles and drones across the Middle East. I don't think that they're going to be targeting Turkey, and they have very good reasons not to do that. But the rest of the Arab world pretty much is in the line of fire. And we've all seen what they've been doing. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, the list goes on and on. It's not just American bases, it's their commercial centers. I think the Iranians are trying to create some sort of terrorized anti-war lobby in the Gulf by doing this. And it's probably going to result in exactly the opposite. But this is what we're seeing. Now, in terms of Turkey, I think it's important to keep in mind that if Turkey gets involved in this, it would be because it sees that the Iranian Kurdish population in Western Iran would launch some sort of uprising. If they see that happening, there are indications that Turkey would invade Western Iran to try and prevent the Kurdish Iranian population from achieving any level of autonomy, because the Turkish fear is that that will spill over into Iraqi Kurds, into Syrian Kurds, which they've been actively repressing and helping the al-Shah regime to repress, and their own Kurdish population in Turkey. So they are very fearful of that. And there are indications that if Turkey gets involved, it would be because of that. It would be to repress the Iranian Kurds. It wouldn't be because of a stray missile.
And what does that all mean for Israel? Israel certainly doesn't want to have to be dealing with security threats out of Ankara at this juncture.
I don't think that there are any immediate threats. Israel and Turkey have tensions that go back further than this war, and they're related to Turkey's aggressive pro-Islamist ideology, its actions in Syria, its support of jihadist Sunni militias. The tensions are not being directly affected by this war, I would say, at all. So I don't think this means anything, I think, for Israel in the immediate term or from a security perspective. I don't think this is a problem that Israel is going to have to deal with.
Thank you so much. Security analyst Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast, The Lapin Assessment. Thank you for being with us on this breaking news edition.
Okay.
And now we turn to another front. Let's go live to our correspondent, Balich Sladin. He joins us from northern Israel. So, Balich, Hezbollah and Iran conducting simultaneous strikes on Wednesday, targeting cities in Israel. Talk us through what is confirmed and the significance of these attacks happening at the same time.
Yes, exactly that. That happened several times, actually, today. Hezbollah targeting Israeli targets, apparently even deep inside Israel, in central Israel. That was coordinated, apparently, with the Iranian missiles that were fired from Iran toward the north and also to the center of Israel. This, of course, will impose a challenge for Israeli defense, air defense systems. But we have seen what happened. After all, most of these missiles were intercepted or fell in open areas, and no damage was caused. Now, no casualties as well, which is, of course, the most important thing. Now, Hezbollah is continuing their statements one after the other about their activities against Israel. The last one was actually talking about confrontation inside Lebanon. They already called the areas that Israel controls inside Lebanon an occupied territory. And we've just heard the chief of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, speaking in his first speech, actually, since taking that decision in intervening in this war. And Naim Qassem repeatedly said that this is actually a defensive act because, after all, Israel has continued since last year attacking Lebanon. They are framing it in a way to look like that they are protecting Lebanon, of course, and he's trying to justify his decision. He talked to the people that are against this action, which is most of the Lebanese, of course, and he is saying that our patience has run out and we need to take action, and this is the actions that we are taking right now. So Hezbollah's chief is justifying the actions taken by his organization. Now, regarding what is happening on the ground as well, we see that Israel just in the last minute, apparently another strike in El Dahia neighborhood that wasn't with any warning before. So maybe we're talking here about an assassination. We will look into that as well. So Israel is not only targeting cities and big communities in the south of Lebanon, like Tyre and also El Beqa area, but definitely also continuing their strikes in Beirut to put more pressure on Hezbollah and, of course, to put more pressure on the Lebanese government to do its part and bend Hezbollah's arm, something that probably will be very, very difficult to do. That's also what the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, is trying to do. He talked with Prime Minister Netanyahu today and told him that he shouldn't actually take action on the ground, expanding the ground operation against Hezbollah. His warning of doing that. But as we see it, Prime Minister Netanyahu and also Defense Minister Katz already took that decision, and the Israeli troops are advancing in southern Lebanon.
Correspondent Balich Sladin, live from northern Israel. Thank you so much for the update. More to come from Balich in the coming hours. Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We don't have much time until the break, but we do know that there are Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon targeting Hezbollah sites as we speak. Your take on how this is unfolding right now?
Yeah, there's a report of a vehicle that was struck in Beirut. We'll see who was the target. Vehicle, then probably not Naim Qassem. He probably won't be driving around anywhere.
Yeah, the IDF, sorry to interrupt, just said that it struck a terrorist in the Beirut area, not saying that he was from Hezbollah. When it is Hezbollah, they usually state that.
So
very
maybe Hamas, maybe Islamic Jihad, or a Revolutionary Guard. Could be that as well, Quds Force. Bottom line, Hezbollah did what Israel wanted Hezbollah to do. They made a fatal mistake, I think a strategic mistake, opening up that front, and now Israel is going to execute plans that have been in preparation for a long, long time, with the ultimate goal of weakening Hezbollah to the weakest point that they've ever been.
We certainly are watching to see how it all unfolds. Strikes right now in southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah sites, and strikes right now inside Tehran. Gentlemen, stay with us. We'll take a deeper look at the diplomatic reaction as well with our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, after the break. A quick break right now, though. When we get back, our breaking news coverage continues. Stay tuned. This is Breaking News Edition.
Do you suffer in pain? Are you stiff, tense, or less active than before? Introducing the EasyWell Remedy Massage System that combines the incredible effects of vibrational therapy, targeted deep tissue shiatsu massage, plus soothing infrared heat. A triple fusion of therapeutic experiences. Full body vibrational therapy increases blood circulation and reduces inflammation. Look at these beads moving from the powerful vibrational motors.
It's like 1,000 little fingers just vibrating my body from head to toe.
Infrared heat penetrates deep to reduce pain, soothe, and relax.
Remedy gets in there and helps deal with the source of the pain, so you feel much better.
The Ultra Shiatsu pillow with 6 infrared heated nodes mimics a professional massage. Plus, it's detachable for deep relief anywhere you need it.
It's just something that you're gonna have to feel for yourself.
Experience the true remedy for your pain and stiffness. Call now.
Are high interest rates keeping you from selling your home? We have a way to get you more money for your home while saving thousands in commissions. At Ideal Agent, we'll connect you with a top local agent who will sell your home fast, for top dollar, and all this for as low as a 2% commission.
We paid a 2% commission, which I don't think we would have had with any other agent, and we got top dollar for our house, and we are just so happy about it, and the results were fantastic.
Ideal Agent connected me with the top 1% agent in my market, and I actually got it at a discount, and I saved about $12,500, which is unheard of when you're working with the top producer in any industry.
We've helped tens of thousands of home sellers get 5-star results with top performing experts you can trust. We guarantee it. Ideal Agent is available nationwide, there's no obligation, and best of all, our service is completely free. Call today or visit idealagent.com.
Iran has hit cities across Israel with a massive attack. There are rockets and drones that are hitting our schools, our homes, our synagogues. I'm Yael Eckstein of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and we urgently need your response now to help bring emergency food, shelter, and life-saving supplies.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has emergency teams across the front lines of Israel's war for survival. Call now to give your gift of $45 and help provide food, shelter, and life-saving supplies. It's your prayers and gifts that give hope and comfort to Israel and the Jewish people.
The Fellowship is a Bible-believing ministry, and we desperately need tens of thousands of faithful believers to answer this call for help now.
Call, scan, or go online now to Stand with Israel.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back to this breaking news edition. Our coverage continues live from Tel Aviv. A new wave of intense Israeli strikes inside Iran right now on day 5 of the joint U.S.-Israeli operation against the Islamic regime, taking out missile launchers and strategic sites belonging to the world's biggest sponsor of terror, a regime with U.S. and Israeli blood on its hands. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is just getting started. The strikes triggering the expected retaliatory attacks on Israel and the far more unexpected spate of attacks on neighboring Gulf states, sparking much concern across the region. And just a short while ago, an update that in Beirut, 2 vehicles have been struck. 2 vehicles have been targeted in the Lebanese capital. It comes just after we discussed earlier with our correspondent Balir Sladin developments across that front as well as we speak. Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and former IDF International spokesperson, Senior Middle East Correspondent Ariel Osaran, and our Senior Correspondent Owen Alterman. And Owen, I want to come to you about the very crucial messaging out of the White House right now. Much criticism in some parts about the war, much support as well. Break it all down for us.
Right. Mike Wag and I spoke to this, the domestic situation in the United States, the vote before Congress. I will say in parentheses, Benita, that again, albeit watching from thousands of miles away, I'm struck by how little polarization there actually is in the United States on this particular issue, especially compared with so many other issues in the Trump era. If you look at it, mainstream Republicans and mainstream Democrats aren't all that far apart on this issue. What the mainstream Republicans are saying is, we support this, but we're skeptical about the timing and about casualties and about the rationale. On the Democratic side, senators are saying, we don't support this because of all those reasons. But on the other hand, we do see some merits to this, and obviously we understand the potential upside in taking down the Iranian regime. Donald Trump, in just the last few minutes, was asked at an event about how the war is going, or spontaneously came out with it and said on a scale of 1 to 10, he would grade it as a 15. So obviously very happy with how this war is going and his characteristic salesmanship and charisma and optimism. Whatever your thoughts are on the president's policies and style, out there in force, Donald Trump trying to generate, I think, a sense of success and momentum, which will carry public opinion forward, because, Benita, there's no arguing with success. And I think if he and Pete Hegseth earlier today can go to the public in the United States and elsewhere, demonstrate a measure of success and momentum, that will help the U.S. and domestic public opinion and abroad. Mike spoke to the argument with Spain. Also, again, 2 sides having different views on what happened. There is a way of reading the Spanish statement as not completely maybe denying what Caroline Leavitt said from the podium. But at any rate, the Spaniards seem at the very least not very interested in putting down the flames. Emmanuel Macron spoke to Benjamin Netanyahu earlier and asked him not to have a ground operation in Lebanon. A statement with some ridicule here in Israel, not particularly interested at this point in time in this kind of conflict to hear from Emmanuel Macron about what Israel's policy should be in Lebanon. But at the end of the day, Benita, we are not Macron's audience. His audience is his domestic audience, where he's trying to make a name for himself in foreign policy. His audience, potentially a domestic Lebanese audience, to show that he's interested in their situation. And by the way, has said he wants to help in the humanitarian sense, those tens of thousands of Lebanese who have been displaced. That could actually be a useful role to play. We have the Chinese Foreign Ministry coming in and saying they're interested in potentially mediating here. I suspect they will not be the last ones to come in and to offer to mediate. But again, how much this conflict could be given to mediation, obviously an open question. And finally, coming back to our story on the Kurds. This is going to make big diplomatic waves. We heard from Yaakov Lapin earlier on how the Turks are likely to respond to this. Spoiler, again, not favorably. And even in other European capitals, there's going to be real concern about destabilizing the Middle East. And so, again, apart from what the Iranian regime can do with this, trying to drive a wedge between ethnic groups and mainstream Iranians in the streets, we're going to be hearing a lot of this in foreign capitals. Again, very, very skeptical, I suspect, about this move.
Red alert sirens are sounding right now in parts of northern Israel. Those alerts going off right now as we speak. Donald Trump might give the operation so far 15 out of 10. There might also be a good rating from Israelis, Ariel Osseran, when they find out that some of the restrictions by the Home Front Command are going to be eased. Tell us more.
Yeah, Benita, this is significant that already on day 5 of this war with Iran, the IDF Home Front Command feels that the situation is improving on the home front and feels comfortable to slightly ease restrictions, moving from essential activity level to limited activity level. That still means that significant limitations on public gatherings are in place. These will come in. This easing of the limitations will come into effect tomorrow noon. But I think despite this update coming as there are infiltrating drone sirens sounding in northern Israel, this indicates a very optimistic view on the part of the IDF that this operation has currently become very successful and that moving forward, the situation is likely to improve. And so I think this is really indicative of the view currently by Israeli military political leadership of how the operation is going so far. You don't get a better indication than this.
Yeah, Jonathan, Pete Hegseth is suggesting that these operations are still in the early days, counterintuitive to the idea that things could be getting easier.
Actually not, because what influences the Israeli home front, as we discussed earlier, is the Iranian capacity to fire missiles. War can engulf Iran and other parts of the region without affecting Israel and the Israeli home front. And if the better things go, the less Israelis will be affected by it on a day-to-day basis, and the easier we can or the more we can ease restrictions. At the end of the day, the only thing that we have to keep in mind is that Hezbollah isn't limited by that, and they still retain the capacity to fire long-range rockets, not missiles, but rockets towards central Israel. They fired throughout the day. We had various salvos. Some of them, it almost appeared as if they were timed to be fired parallel from Lebanon and from Iran towards targets in central Israel, maybe in an attempt to trick the defensive systems. So that will still remain until Israel takes that out. I think Israel will be able to do that as well, and it will strike targets in various parts of Lebanon with significant success. But at the end of the day, I think there is a lot of work left to do in Iran, lots of infrastructure, personnel, sites to degrade, etc. And the sooner we can go back to working, producing, eating, and paying taxes, I think that's how the country would prefer it.
The country has certainly shown its resilience in the past. No doubt it is going to do the same this time around. Gentlemen, stay with us. I want to bring in Jason Brodsky now, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. He joins us from New York. Jason, good to see you. Thank you for your time. The big question is who is going to be in charge in the Islamic Republic now that the supreme leader is no longer. That subsequent meeting or assembly of experts was targeted in an airstrike on Tuesday. So what details are known about the regime's interim leadership council? Their ideology is that of the regime, clearly.
Well, it's great to be with you. Yes, the regime is being led by a triumvirate interim leadership council comprised of President Masoud Pezeshkian, who's never been a real player in the military and security apparatus. Also, Gholam Hossein Mohseni-Ejei, the Chief Justice of Iran's regime, who's a bloodstained actor. He once been a reporter and is a notorious, infamous person within the Islamic Republic. And then we have Ali Reza Arafi, who is who's a very steeped in the Islamic Republic promotes religious, cultural, and educational activities. He's a member of the Guardian Council and is the head of Iran's seminary. He's been steeped in Khomeiniist thinking his entire career. So with this council, I view more continuity than change, really. It's really a placeholder or a caretaker kind of role that this interim leadership council is playing. But there are other players on the field as well who are exercising significant authority in the Islamic Republic, like Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament. He's a former IRGC commander who's been really liaising with the armed forces. And you have Ali Larijani, who's the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, who's been also playing a key role. So now the decision-making has become more diffuse since Ayatollah Khamenei's demise, because when he was alive, everyone knew where the buck stopped and there was one address. But now there are multiple different players.
And when you talk about the buck stopping at one address, what about the address of the son of the supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei? We do know that obviously the process is still underway and no one wants to jump the gun, so to speak. But he's also been far more in the shadows, hasn't played much more of a public role, more behind the scenes. What more can you tell us about him and his thinking?
Mojtaba Khamenei is a leading candidate to succeed his father. According to reports, he did survive the strike on the leadership compound, and he has effectively run his father's office, the office of the Supreme Leader, for many, many years. He's operated behind the scenes, liaising with the IRGC and other security institutions. He's developed his own patronage network, the Habib Circle, in which he's used to position and power in the Islamic Republic. And Mojtaba Khamenei is steeped in radical ideology within the Islamic Republic. So I would view him as someone who is going to continue his father's legacy and even double down on it in a big way, as he's not going to be a moderating, pragmatic figure that some have been trying to portray him as in Western press.
Meanwhile, reports that Israel has warned any new leader would be an unequivocal target for elimination. Succession isn't so easy in regimes, is it? Jason Brodsky, live from New York. Always appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you very much for being with us on this Breaking News edition. Now, the European Union is set to hold an urgent joint meeting with the Gulf Cooperation Council under the Bahraini presidency in direct response to Iran's attack on a UK base in Cyprus. A senior EU official telling I24 News that while Cyprus was not the target of that attack, the EU stands firmly with its member states in the face of any threat. Senior correspondent Guy Azriel has the story.
Yes, several days since that drone attack on the UK base in Cyprus, we've yet to see a decisive action taken by the EU to this attack. We have seen some ships being sent both from Greece and from France, perhaps later also from the UK, only for defensive missions. And as we report this evening, the EU is set to hold an urgent meeting with members of the GCC in the Gulf, a meeting that is meant mainly to express solidarity, to speak about de-escalation. But whenever it comes to actual action on the ground, that is very difficult to see. We spoke this evening with a senior EU member about that meeting and about the attack in Cyprus. He tells me that while Cyprus was not the target of the attack, the EU stands collectively, firmly, and unequivocally with our EU member states in the face of any threat. However, it is very difficult to see a situation in which the EU joins the fighting of the US and Israel against Iran, of course, the source of these threats on European soil as well. So this meeting will be taking place over Zoom tomorrow. And we should mention that Israel and the US continue their operation against Iran, while Europe, for now, stands on the side, perhaps assisting with some defensive missions, but certainly staying out of any offensive whatsoever.
Thank you so much to our senior correspondent, Guy Azriel. And now it's a pleasure to welcome Danny Danon, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, joining us from New York. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. Many developments on the go. Major success from the start of this joint US-Israeli operation on Saturday, the elimination of the supreme leader, more than 40 Iranian commanders, regime leaders with American and Israeli blood on their hands. It's 5 days in and could continue for a couple of weeks still. Your thoughts so far, your insights.
Thank you for having me, Benita. You know, for years we said we believe the Iranian regime when they chant death to America and death to Israel. And finally, we take action and we know how to handle it. You know, we prepared for this operation and together with the US, today we see the results on the ground. We are dismantling their nuclear capabilities, their ballistic missile infrastructure, and hopefully the next steps will be also affecting their control in the region. So I think so far we can be very satisfied of the results, but we have to understand that it's not over yet. Iran today, they are in desperation, they are panicked, and we see the way they act. Like rabid dog, they attack their neighbors, they send ballistic missiles to Cyprus, even to Turkey. So it's not over yet. We have to be careful about, you know, the next few days. But today, when we almost completed the air superiority, and we have almost full control of the airspace over Iran, it will make our life much, much easier.
People in this part of the world all too aware of the existential threat posed by the head of the snake, Iran. What then, though, do you make of the criticism, those who are questioning the need for this action, questioning the need for this joint operation right now?
Well, I have a lot of discussions, mainly with my European colleagues, you know, and they bring that claim, why now, why not to wait? And my question to them is to wait until when? You know, we all know that Iran lied to the world. They didn't develop the nuclear capabilities for peaceful usage. You don't hide it in mountains, and you don't enrich uranium to the levels above 60% if it is for peaceful purpose. So we know they lied about that. We know that they have the ballistic missiles capability. They see they are capable to launch it almost everywhere in the region. So what was the next? To wait for them to actually assemble, to weaponize the missiles? We cannot wait for that moment. That would have been too late. That's why we took action at the right time. And I hope that those countries, mainly the European one, will wake up and will understand that they have to join the efforts, not to condemn them.
What then do you make of that strategy? Do you think it's likely to change the way these Gulf nations and others in Europe have perceived Tehran? What is it going to take and what does it mean long term? Your thoughts very briefly, please.
Well, first, we have seen a major change. You know, on Saturday, I sat at the Security Council, and to hear my colleague from Bahrain attacking the Iranian ambassador, and I think Iran made a huge mistake. They thought that by attacking the Gulf countries, they would put pressure on Israel and the US. And today we think that those countries are actually putting pressure on us to keep going, to finish the job. So I think this alliance is a very important one, and hopefully it will lead to more peace accords after we finish the job with Iran.
Danny Danon, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, live from New York. Always appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us on this Breaking News edition.
Thank you very much.
Senior correspondent Owen Alterman, your reaction briefly.
Yeah, listen, it's easy for Europe to be a punching bag, but they're also a major diplomatic playing field here. And we hear it also from Ambassador Danon and others. The huge efforts made to try to sway the Europeans and try to get them on each side's side. It's poetic in the sense, Benita, that the European countries and the Gulf states are going to be meeting. Those two together are the kind of center of gravity diplomatically and even geopolitically in this war. Hugely important and hugely consequential that the GCC countries so far have taken the U.S. and Israel's side. And the Europeans, because of that, in large part, have taken the U.S. and Israel's side. Maybe some disappointment in the Gulf states, or maybe an understanding of the limits of what the Europeans can do. The Europeans in the Middle East have always been much more interested in their near abroad in the Eastern Mediterranean than in the Gulf. But this is the center of gravity. This is the battlefield diplomatically and in some sense militarily between Iran and on the one hand, the United States and Israel on the other hand. And the fact that these countries are taking the U.S. and Israel's side is in some ways decisive, both in terms of what's going on diplomatically and even on the battlefield.
Changing times, changing dynamics. And here in Israel, missile barrages yet again today, simultaneous rocket and missile fire from Hezbollah out of Lebanon and out of Iran, shrapnel falling in several locations. Correspondent Joe Brown was in Tel Aviv and filed this update.
If you were to come here in Nahalat Binyamin on any other day, it would be almost impossible to do what I'm doing now, walking in a straight line with zero interruptions. This is one of the busiest places in Tel Aviv, full of bars, restaurants, and most importantly, hundreds, if not thousands of people. But right now, it's a ghost town. The one place that is open, this pizza place behind me, is one of the few places that is open, and it only opened today for the first time since the start of the war. If you look here, this is where bars are supposed to be, but it's all closed down. This is because of the IDF's Home Front commands that states that you should not be convening in public places unless they are inside a shelter. And largely, the Israeli public have been following along with these restrictions, even during the celebrations of Purim, which were supposed to be taking place over the last couple of days. There were some parties in underground shelters. Yesterday, there was even a wedding in an underground shelter. But largely, people have been adhering to the rules. And this has been very much beneficial to the state of Israel. There have only been 2 strikes that have proven deadly in the country, one in Tel Aviv in which 1 person was killed who did not go to a safe room, and one in Beit Shemesh in which 9 people were killed, and that was a direct hit on a safe room in which there wasn't really anything that they could do about that. So all in all, the people are not out in the streets, but one thing I would say, though, is that this is busier than it has been over the last couple of days, as the amount of rockets that are getting fired towards Israel has been decreasing rapidly. There's been around about an 86% decrease from the first day until yesterday. There are people who are feeling more comfortable with leaving their apartments, going out on walks, doing errands in places where they are able to do so. But largely, the city is, as of right now, a ghost town.
Correspondent Joe Brown in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Joe. Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and former IDF International spokesperson. Donald Trump saying a short while ago the U.S. is in a very strong position on Iran, whose leadership is rapidly going. Something that we were discussing earlier on in the broadcast. Your take and assessment on the way things stand right now, both inside Iran, the United States, and in Israel. Jonathan.
So I think a reflection that I have is how fast everything is happening, right? We are just about 5 days into the war, and we are already talking about end state and, the political overall objective of a war, even though it hasn't been a week. That is really addressing the end game here, right? Who will lead Iran and what would it look like? And that's, of course, something that has been heavily contested by various parties. I would assume, this is really where I think if there will be a kind of a division between Israeli targets, objectives, and the real strategic aspirations and those that are palatable for the Americans, I think this is it. Because Israel is in a much more binary situation. We tend to want to see the regime fully dismantled and for Iran really to change its posture and its entire strategy towards Israel, whereas many believe, myself included, that the US will suffice with less, something of a Maduro situation in Venezuela, where it's someone who isn't outwardly hostile towards the US and someone that they can do business with. I hope that Israel will be able to influence things to such an extent that that we really can bring about and set into motion the activities on the ground that eventually will bring down the regime. If that doesn't happen, then the regime will stay in power, and we should assume that we will have to deal with them again in the future. And that's, of course, a dynamic that we're all too familiar with.
In recent days, we discussed the potential legacy that the supreme leader might leave. Now, I ask you the follow-up question. He is no longer. What legacy does he leave?
Well, it's a legacy of failure. We discussed it, and we said that this is what the chances were. But it's a legacy of failure, a legacy of really driving a quite tremendous country with significant human capital and tremendous natural capital driving it down the drain, driving its economy down the drain, its infrastructure, its international reputation, its pride, its very sovereignty, and it's gambling on a lot of wrong horses against a lot of strong forces, against Israel, against the US. And it's first and foremost a failure of their program to encircle Israel, build that ring of fire around Israel and bring Israel to destruction. Quite the opposite is happening. And I think at the end of the day, that will be his legacy.
The proxies were such a huge concern for Israel. What do you see their abilities and their capabilities under a potential new leader down the line, briefly?
Yeah, I think we are so far a bit underwhelmed by the proxies. And I say that with caution because we should never underestimate our enemies. We've done that in the past and we've learned it the hard way. But I think Hezbollah, we anticipated that they would join sooner and harder. We anticipated that the Houthis would join sooner and harder, but so far they are waiting for orders from Iran, which I don't know why they need to wait. If you want to shoot, you shoot. And it's odd that they haven't done so already. And the fact that Hezbollah joined in is exactly what Israel wanted them to do. I think Israel is in a very good military position to actually dial back years or decades of Iranian investment against it. And it's a good place to be, and I hope that we'll be able to have the political leadership, foresight and focus and keep the momentum going.
Finally, briefly, on-the-spot question. Donald Trump gives the progress so far a 15 out of 10, your rating.
I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
We'll take a 9 out of 10.
And express my tremendous gratitude to our pilots and forces and agents on the ground.
9 out of 10. I think the nation can be happy. We wait to see what lies ahead. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being here in studio. Ariel and Owen, you're staying with us through the break. So much more to discuss, so many more developments, plus an update on that breaking news with I24 News. Stay tuned. Back in a bit.
Call 800-919-8734.
Tired of the hassle and high cost of selling a home? We can help. At Ideal Agent, we'll connect you with a top local agent that'll sell your home fast for top dollar, and all this for as low as a 2% commission.
We got the top dollar for our house and the lowest commission that I could have imagined. The house sold in 2 days. It was so exciting for us.
Ideal Agent is available nationwide, there's no obligation, and best of all, our service is completely free. Call today or visit idealagent.com.
Iran has hit cities across Israel with a massive attack. There are rockets and drones that are hitting our schools, our homes, our synagogues. I'm Yael Eckstein of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and we urgently need your response now to help bring emergency food, shelter, and life-saving supplies.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has emergency teams across the front lines of Israel's war for survival. Call now to give your gift of $45 and help provide food, shelter, and life-saving supplies. It's your prayers and gifts that give hope and comfort to Israel and the Jewish people.
The Fellowship is a Bible-believing ministry, and we desperately need tens of thousands of faithful believers to answer this call for help now.
Call, scan, or go online now to stand with Israel.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Wherever you are, access our programmes, reports, in-depth discussions and expert analysis anytime, anywhere, right from your phone. All the content from the I24 News website, the latest articles, exclusive interviews, VOD and live broadcasts is now just a tap away on the I24 News app. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
Welcome back to our breaking news edition. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for staying with us. A new wave of intense Israeli strikes inside Iran right now. Day 5 of the joint US-Israeli operation against the Islamic regime, taking out missile launchers and strategic sites belonging to the world's biggest sponsor of terror. A regime with US and Israeli blood on its hands. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the US is just getting started. The strikes triggering the expected retaliatory attacks on Israel and the far more unexpected spate of attacks on neighboring Gulf states, sparking much concern across the region. The key Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut off, with the regime vowing to set vessels alight. A range of developments on this day: a US submarine sinking an Iranian warship in international waters off the coast of Sri Lanka. Turkey is now in the mix, with NATO air defense systems shooting down an Iranian missile that was traveling towards Ankara's airspace. The first time NATO forces have intercepted an Iranian missile traveling towards a member country's airspace in this war. President Donald Trump praising the unprecedented joint operation, claiming Iran's military installations had been knocked out from its Navy to its Air Force and more. Here's the latest from the US president in just the past hour.
On the war front, to put it mildly, I would say. Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. And we're going to continue to do well. We have the greatest military in the world by far. And that was a tremendous threat to us for many years. 47 years they've been killing our people and killing people from all over the world. And I think we have great support. And I think if we didn't do it first, they would have done it to Israel and give us a shot if that was possible.
15 out of 10 is a pretty impressive number so far. For more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and the former Europe and Middle East Editor at the Associated Press, Senior Middle East Correspondent Ariel Osaran, and still with us, our Senior Correspondent Owen Alterman. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. So much to discuss, much to unpack, but we need to start with our exclusive I24 News report. Yulia Pobogalova getting exclusive details. Ariel Osaran, you've got it all. What is the latest? What can you share?
Yeah, amazing information by our senior producer, Yulia Pobogalova, of Kurdish forces in Iraq have launched a ground offensive into Iranian territory, already taking offensive positions in the border town of Marivan. This is a mountainous range and the border between Iran and Iraq, according to official from the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. Thousands of Kurdish fighters have crossed the border, and this coincides with the retreat of Iranian forces from the area of Marivan. Now, this offensive already began on Monday. Now, in the past couple of days, we've heard reporting of high-level conversations between the Trump administration as well as with Kurdish leadership, coinciding with a warning call from the Iranian foreign minister to the president of the Iraqi Kurdistan region not to threaten the border, not to be a platform for any third party to take advantage of the situation. It does not appear that those warnings have been heeded. Now, as this is unfolding, as we've been reporting this, intense strikes been targeting the IRGC's Ramadan base in the city of Marivan, in that same area where the Iraqi or where the Kurdish forces have already crossed the border into Iran. And so this is a very significant development because, you know, it's very challenging for many to draw a line between President Trump's promise to help the protesters, to bring down the regime, and how these airstrikes are going to lead to that. This is one of the key axes that are going to potentially lead to that. You need the ground forces. You need Iranian fighters armed on the ground to challenge Iran, the IRGC, and the Iranian armed forces. So this ground offensive by Iranian Kurdish fighters, thousands of them crossing the border from Iraq into Iran, has begun, and it is already underway.
This exclusive story gaining so much traction already. The significance, Dan, of a development like this, what it means on the ground, and the likely reaction, of course, across the region.
It's extremely significant. The main question now is this: if the goal is to bring down the regime, and clearly that is a goal, we don't know if they'll stick to that goal, but it's desirable, I think, on the part of most of the protagonists and most of the Arab world as well. How do you do it with only air power? And generally, you'll hear strategists tell you that that is impossible. You need forces on the ground. There are many things that you could do, including to try to compel desertions in the military, the paramilitary, and even the Revolutionary Guard. But one thing would be to bring in Kurdish fighters abutting Iranian Kurdistan, effectively, in the northeast, and basically occupy the energies of the Iranian army so that they will not be so free to massacre protesters elsewhere, not just the army, but also, as I say, the paramilitary and so forth. But also, in projecting such aggression towards Iran and making Iran look again weak, it could embolden protesters. And moreover, if the Iranian Kurds end up being very well armed through the good services of the U.S. by the Iraqi Kurds, they could actually march on Tehran. Unlikely, because it's far away, but that is another possibility. You'd have an armed force on the ground against the regime, not just weighing them down in Kurdistan, but potentially even challenging them. It is dangerous, however, because whenever a despotic government like Iran's is attacked from outside by people who want to help the locally oppressed population, one of the classic things they can do is try to deploy nationalism and say this is an attack on our country and not just this regime. And of course, if this ends up looking like not just an Israeli attack on Iran, but a Kurdish attack on Iran, that potentially can be used by the regime. It may be a lever that you're giving them. So it's a double-edged sword, but what is for sure, it has the potential to be effective because the Kurds historically have been ferocious and effective in carving out autonomy for themselves, in imposing their will on larger countries. That is applied in Syria. That is applied for sure in Iraq, where they have a great degree of autonomy. They've been maybe not effective in getting autonomy, but they have really been a bother to the Turks. And it looks like that may happen again in the fourth major country where there are Kurds, Iran.
Oh, and your thoughts on exactly that?
To follow up on some of the points Dan was making, I think it's even more than the regime can deploy nationalism. It is that, but also the fear of a failed state, the fear of a breakup of the country. And you see this over and over again with Iran specialists. One Iran specialist on Twitter said he had never seen more unanimity in the analytical community than how much Iran specialists oppose this idea of arming Kurdish militias and having them come in. And again, the real risk of driving a wedge between two real assets in the fight against the regime, the Kurds on the one hand, and ethnic groups who are well organized, and on the other hand, those incredibly brave protesters in the street inside Iran, the throngs of diaspora activists outside Iran. The Israeli public loves both. the historic affinity for Kurds across Kurdistan, and of course, the growing affinity over the past few years with Iranian activists in the diaspora, and just real admiration for their passion, and even more for the enormous courage of those Iranian protesters inside.
And by the way, the third large group in Iran, well, of many, are the Azeris.
And that's the point. As we both know, ethnic Persians are a small majority in Iran.
50-some%.
If 40 to 50% of the country are ethnic minorities, and of course that's the risk, is that what starts in Kurdistan doesn't end in Kurdistan. It moves on to Iranian Azerbaijan, to Baluchistan, to other parts of the country, and really unnerves the Iranian middle class and the mainstream that have seen themselves as the backbone of Iran on the day
An
after.
interesting wrinkle here when it comes to the minorities is that the president of Iran, Pezeshkian, is himself Azeri. Weirdly, despite his Armenian-sounding name, he's Azeri. And he reflects something rather interesting, which is that the Azeri minority in Iran, which is very, very large, has historically not been so separatist. And he represents that. The president is an Azeri. But interestingly, he's also different from the radical Muslims surrounding him. When it comes to major officials in the regime, he's a doctor, he's a non-cleric, he lives in a Euclidean universe. He's, I think, seen as someone who, if the regime doesn't fall completely but is reorganized, could end up being a person you can perhaps talk to. And in that regard, he represents non-Persian Iran that might be somehow semi-moderate, or maybe a figure in the transition to dare I say, democratic Iran to something less theocratic.
So much more to unpack, a developing story, more and more details emerging as and when they happen. We will keep bringing them to you. Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to discuss many more developments within the show. But right now, I want to bring in once again Yaakov Lapin, security analyst and host of the Lapin Assessment, joining us right now from Rehovot in Israel. So, Yaakov, we've been talking about the successes so far inside Iran in terms of the joint operation between Israel and the United States. Right now as well, an active developing situation in southern Lebanon and even in Beirut. Your assessment across the region right now, how this joint operation is going. It's day 5.
Yeah, we've just heard from the IDF that it attacked dozens of strategic targets belonging to Hezbollah, including rocket launchers and terrorist command centers. These are obviously targets that have been slowly building for a long time on the IDF Northern Command's target bank or target list. And in Iran, we're really seeing just wave after wave of devastating strikes taking out core regime capabilities. We had that vast military complex in eastern Tehran that was basically destroyed earlier today, and it housed the headquarters of the IRGC, Quds Force, the Cyber Command, the Basij, major blow to the regime. And we're seeing missile launchers, dozens of missile launchers taken out over the past 24 hours. So regime command and control and missile capabilities, they appear to be the two kinds of categories of targets that still are the priority. And we are seeing a distinct decrease in the ability of the Iranian regime to fire ballistic missiles. Some of the attacks in the past day have involved only a single missile, and they're decreasing. They're decreasing in scope. And even if the frequency seems a little bit high sometimes during the day, these are significantly smaller volleys. At the beginning of the war, they were firing dozens. And today, in some attacks, they fire just one. This is a direct result of the fact that more than 300 missile launchers have been destroyed. Now there's a hunt on for the mobile launchers. The Israeli Air Force has obtained air superiority over the areas that it is operating in Iran, Tehran, Western Iran, other parts of the country. And now they're entering a stage where they're going to, I think, be using and leveraging this air superiority to continue taking out as many regime targets as possible for as long as this war continues.
As we're speaking, CENTCOM coming through with an update saying Iranian drone launches have been reduced by 73% and ballistic missile launches by 86% since Saturday, speaking to exactly what you are detailing right now.
Yep. This is, we're seeing it. I think we experience it here in Israel. It's pretty unmistakable. And as a result of this improved situation in the home front, the Home Front Command just released a statement saying that it's going to take the country out of the most stringent restrictions, and it's going to put it in a sort of what it calls essential mode. And that means that people can gather up to 50 people if they are in the vicinity of a safe room or a shelter. Otherwise, they can't. The school and education system will remain closed. We'll continue to work on a remote basis. But people will now be able to gather up to 50 people, and also workplaces will be permitted to be open if they can offer people safe rooms and shelters. So we're seeing a certain loosening of the restrictions, and this is a direct reflection, of course, of the improved situation in the home front. So it's pretty unmistakable.
Certainly good news for millions of Israelis waiting to get back to some kind of routine. Security analyst Yaakov Lapin, live from Rehovot. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for being with us on this breaking news edition.
Sure.
And talking about developments on the ground, let's check in once again with our correspondent Balich Sladin. He joins us from northern Israel. We know earlier in the day, Hezbollah and Iran striking together earlier Wednesday. Talk to us about the latest developments across that northern front. We also know that Israel is striking Hezbollah targets up as close to Beirut. Tell us more.
Yes, the targeting of Hezbollah operatives in Beirut is not stopping. In the past hour, 2 operatives were killed, apparently, or assassinated, eliminated in different strikes. We're talking actually about strikes that happened almost like 10, 20 meters from each other. One person that was actually capturing those 2 sites where those cars or motorcycles were struck were actually very, very close to each other. And there is a report also that talks about another apparently assassination in one of the apartments in the southern suburb of Beirut in Al-Dahiya. That means that Israel is continuing its pressure on Hezbollah. That's right after the speech that we have heard from Naim Qassem, and the IDF is just issuing a statement a short while ago talking about the last wave of strikes on Hezbollah targets all over Lebanon. We're talking here about rockets and missile launch sites located south of the Litani River. The IDF is emphasizing this. Of course, it's because the Lebanese armed forces did say over and over again that they have cleared all of the area south of the Litani River. That happens to be not true, of course. Now, the IDF is continuing with their targeting of Hezbollah infrastructure, not only in the south of Lebanon, but also in El-Biqa area, one of Hezbollah's strongholds. And as we see also in Beirut, the main stronghold for Hezbollah. Hezbollah, from its side, after the speech by Naim Qassem that tried to justify the engagement in this conflict between Israel and Iran, the U.S. and Iran, we see that they are continuing with their statements, recording or talking about the activities, the military activities against Israel. 19 so far since this morning. This is a high number relatively to what we have also been seeing even in the past war. They're talking about launching drones specifically, but also about rockets and missiles that they have fired to central Israel, to the north, those ones that were coordinated apparently with the Iranians, as you've mentioned, but also the confrontations with the IDF. The last one was in El-Khiyam. Now El-Khiyam is a very closed village to the border, which also means or proves that LAF, the Lebanese armed forces, did not actually clear the area from Hezbollah's operatives and are not able also to prevent them from reaching that area.
Correspondent Balich Sladin, live from northern Israel. Appreciate the update. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Now, as we were discussing earlier, the war in this region has forced the closure of airspace throughout the Middle East, leaving tens of thousands of people stranded. Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport has not operated passenger flights since the start of Operation Roaring Lion on Saturday. Now, with Iranian ballistic missile attacks continuing, Israeli officials are gearing up to conduct rescue missions to bring Israelis stuck abroad back home. Our Emily Francis has the details.
Ben Gurion Airport has been at a standstill with the ongoing war against Iran and continued Iranian missile barrages into Israel. Yesterday, Israeli Minister of Transport Miri Regev announced that airspace will reopen ahead of schedule.
I approved bringing forward the reopening of the airspace, which we had planned to open next week, God willing. The airspace will be open on the night between Wednesday and Thursday.
Ben Gurion Airport has also served a strategic purpose. During the U.S. military buildup in the region last week, planes were reportedly spotted on the tarmac.
We are doing everything to bring Israeli citizens home safely, naturally in a measured and gradual manner, in accordance with security directives.
As of now, there will not be outgoing flights, only repatriation efforts for as many as 100,000 Israelis stuck abroad. The goal is to bring back 10,000 per day. That said, hundreds of tourists and Israelis alike are trying to get out any way they can, pouring through Menachem Begin border terminal south of Eilat along the Egypt border.
In Taba, we are here because the airport in Tel Aviv is closed, and we don't know when they open. So our trip is ended in this day, and tomorrow we have flight. So we must go back in our country.
In Paris, relieved tourists touched down safely after being stranded in Middle Eastern countries, also struck by Iran.
The explosion in itself was extremely shocking. We were startled by a big boom at our hotel, so we were immediately sheltered at a car park. We weren't allowed to sleep in the rooms. And then there were several explosions the entire day.
This tourist was in Israel, but somehow got across the border to Amman, Jordan.
I'm returning from Jerusalem and from Jericho, and actually, we experienced 3 difficult days of hell. The missiles were flying by, we heard sirens for 3 days. I haven't slept for 3 days. It was very difficult emotionally. The worry was lurking, of course, but we got through it.
And now back in studio with our panel, a new development. There have been so many questions around the way Iran has lashed out at Gulf nations, to the surprise of many, and interestingly enough, often targeting hotels, ports, civilian places as well. Many questioning the strategy, some saying it's panic, many trying to make sense of that. Now, in a new development, the Arab League is telling Iran to halt attacks on Gulf nations, demanding that Tehran stop the attacks, which it is calling a strategic mistake, saying Iran must come to its senses. Dan Perry, your thoughts, your reaction?
Well, no one trembles before the Arab League.
But how often does the Arab League criticize Iran?
They've criticized Iran, but this is part of the progression that we're seeing here. Iran chose to attack these countries, but it was not a huge surprise. Iran, at the same time, did not really try to cause tremendous damage. It tried to deliver a message, and the message they're trying to get across to the Gulfies is pressure the Americans to stop. What exactly is it Iran wants is not so clear, because Larijani on one hand says there's nothing to talk about, and the foreign minister says we would like renewed talks where maybe, perhaps, they might accept a diktat now that they've been so decapitated. The Arab League, obviously, is going to ask Iran to stop. I'm not sure that this is so wise of the Arab League, because it tells Iran that this is very upsetting to the Arabs, and therefore their strategy is working. I imagine Iran will continue to calibrate its attacks on the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, with a view to disrupt their economy but not kill people. Either way, we've already seen some of these countries, as the U.S. said today, starting to defend themselves, with the exception of the UAE. They don't have very powerful militaries. But what is indisputable is that these are U.S. allies, by and large, including Qatar. Even though Qatar, tries to have a foot in every camp, they host the biggest American base in the region. And right now, that is coming home to roost. America has involved itself in a truly global historic operation against Iran, something quite spectacular that we haven't seen in decades. These are America's allies, and therefore right now, they are Iran's enemies. It's hard to contemplate that all these countries, including Saudi Arabia, are on the side of Israel that is fighting side by side with the U.S. in a war that has global impact and that the Israeli-American side initiated. I mean, this is unimaginable. It would have been unimaginable only a few years ago.
Had they been targeting U.S. bases on these Gulf nations, only one thing, but Dubai Airport, some of the hotels, the fires that we've seen, and your thoughts on that strategy?
Look, high risk, high reward strategies and high risk, high reward strategies don't usually give you the reward. You usually pay a price for them, which is why they're high risk. The Iranians apparently felt that they had no other choice. They had so few cards to play geopolitically and militarily that this was simply a risk that they had to take on for themselves. It hasn't panned out, and high risk gambles rarely do. On the other hand, why might they have miscalculated if this were to miscalculation? Because these countries put such a premium on quiet, put such a premium on economic development, put such a premium on trying to have good relations with everyone, that it might have been thought that in spite of the high risk here, that maybe the risk was lower than had been expected because these countries simply wouldn't want to respond. But so far it hasn't worked, and we've seen the results. A kind of center of gravity geopolitically, because Benita, the attacks on these countries has galvanized public opinion across the West and elite opinion too. To Iran's detriment.
It could have gone one of two ways. One, it could have really freaked out the Arabs to the point where they insist to the U.S. that the U.S. stop the war, pause the war, see if negotiations can happen again. That could have happened. That was the high reward that the Iranians probably wanted. The high risk was that these countries would be so upset, but also calculate that Iran is now so weakened that they can afford this and essentially join the coalition against them and themselves become committed to regime change in Iran. You will not hear this openly from the Gulfies, but I believe that is actually what they want.
One sentence. To my knowledge, feel free to correct me, we haven't seen big headlines today of attacks in the Gulf states.
Yeah, I think they're backing down.
And that tells you?
Perhaps the Iranians are taking stock, learning lessons, and understanding that the high reward is not attainable and the high risk just isn't worth it.
We'll be watching to see. It's simply day 5. Gentlemen, stay with us. So much more to discuss right now, though. We're taking a very short break. Don't go anywhere. Much more to discuss after the break. Plus, we go live to the White House. This is I24 News, Breaking News Edition. Back again in just 2 minutes.
Are high interest rates keeping you from selling your home? We have a way to get you more money for your home while saving thousands in commissions. At Ideal Agent, we'll connect you with a top local agent who will sell your home fast, for top dollar, and all this for as low as a 2% commission.
We paid a 2% commission, which I don't think we would have had with any other agent, and we got top dollar for our house, and we are just so happy about it, and the results were fantastic.
Ideal Agent connected me with the top 1% agent in my market, and I actually got it at a discount, and I saved about $12,500, which is unheard of when you're working with the top producer in any industry.
We've helped tens of thousands of home sellers get 5-star results with top-performing experts you can trust. We guarantee it. Ideal Agent is available nationwide, there's no obligation, and best of all, our service is completely free. Call today or visit idealagent.com.
$98734.
wherever you are. Access our programmes, reports, in-depth discussions and expert analysis anytime, anywhere, right from your phone. All the content from the i24 News website, the latest articles, exclusive interviews, VOD and live broadcasts is now just a tap away on the i24 News app. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
Keeping up with current events in the Middle East can often seem challenging. That's why we're bringing you a new show to get past all the noise. Join me every Wednesday for an in-depth conversation where we break down the core issues concerning the region.
Welcome back to this breaking news edition. Our coverage continues. A new wave of intense Israeli strikes inside Iran right now. Day 5 of the joint US-Israeli operation against the Islamic regime, taking out missile launchers and strategic sites belonging to the world's biggest sponsor of terror, a regime with US and Israeli blood on its hands. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the US is just getting started. The strikes triggering the expected retaliatory attacks on Israel and the far more unexpected spate of attacks on neighboring Gulf states, sparking much concern across the region. The key Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut off, with the regime vowing to set vessels alight. A range of developments on this day: a US submarine sinking an Iranian warship in international waters off the coast of Sri Lanka. Turkey is now in the mix, with NATO air defense systems shooting down an Iranian missile that was traveling towards Ankara's airspace. The first time NATO forces have intercepted an Iranian missile traveling towards a member country's airspace in this war. President Donald Trump praising the unprecedented joint operation, claiming Iran's military installations had been knocked out from its navy to its air force and more. So for more, let's go once again to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He's at the White House in Washington. So we know the U.S. says it will strike deeper into Iran as war spreads across the region. We also heard a short while ago Donald Trump is very happy. His rating is 15 out of 10. What is the latest at the White House? What can you tell us, Mike?
Yeah, President Trump at an event just a short while ago addressing the issue of Iran, although that wasn't the exact topic of the event, but nevertheless straying into that territory, saying about Iran's leadership, quote, "It's rapidly going. Everyone that wants to be a leader ends up dead." Could be trouble selecting a partner at some point in time, but for the meantime, it seems to be going their way. Meanwhile, Trump also saying Iran's missiles are being wiped out rapidly. Their launchers are being wiped out. Now, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane, addressed that issue earlier today, saying that the rate in which Iran has been able to fire off ballistic missiles has been precipitously dropping over the last several days. Their launchers as well are being wiped out. So things are going well on that front. Meanwhile, in the sea, as you mentioned, that sunken ship off the coast of Sri Lanka. There was another sunken ship yesterday, the Suleimani, it was named. And now Hegseth and other administration officials are feeling confident not only about air superiority over the skies in Tehran, but also naval superiority in Iranian waters. And we're getting closer here to what the American administration feels is an opportunity to really move forward without much defense left for Iran. Of course, they still have ballistic missiles. They still have those drones, which are quite complicated. A short while ago, Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who's had a lot of experience with those Iranian-made drones that have been given to Russia to harm Ukraine, Zelensky stepping forward and saying, hey, you give me some assurances here, you make sure that I'm not losing too much in the process, I'm going to give you some help with how to finally defeat those Shahed drones. So now Ukraine working its way into the matter as well as the coalition builds up a little bit more. You mentioned the issue of Turkey. This was addressed earlier today as well. Of course, all the NATO countries have this provision, Article 5. They have to come to the defense of another NATO country if they come under attack. But the Trump administration saying it simply didn't apply in this particular matter, and therefore Article 5 not being invoked, that would set off a whole nother chain. We're talking World War type action here. So it's chaotic enough as it is right now. But the Trump administration, whether it comes from the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, they really feel that they're winning this war and can wrap it up possibly in the next few days, at least according to Pete Hegseth earlier today, or at least wrap up air superiority over Iran. Not the whole shebang. That's going to take some more time.
Because he does say that this is just getting started. I'm not sure if that is simply a muscle flex kind of lingo, but it does suggest that maybe there is a long road ahead. What is your sense politically of the sentiment about the war right now? Many asking questions about the end game on the political side. What is the latest behind you in D.C.?
Well, no doubt whatsoever, the Trump administration has had mixed messaging, sometimes convoluted messaging, unclear still exactly what brought President Trump, if it was something specific or just this general idea that Iran was going to attack at some point. Caroline Levitt, the spokeswoman earlier this afternoon, called it a feeling, but a cumulative effect. So still very general and opaque in some ways as to what brought President Trump to that final decision to launch that preemptive attack against Iran. In the halls of Congress, largely unsatisfied with the answers on the Democratic side. Even some Republicans are saying, hey, we've got to have more clarity here, especially about what's to come. The decision's already been made, but how do we get out of this in the end? There is going to be a vote in the Senate on a war powers resolution. Same thing eventually in the House. Democrats are going to vote against it almost, not quite, but almost unanimously. There are a couple of strays, but the Republicans, I think the moderates, are going to be the ones to watch for in terms of how much displeasure, how much concern, possibly how much anger they throw Trump's way in these debates that are going to be taking place in public in the halls or in the chambers of Congress. And then the final vote, how much disapproval there is on the Republican side. It's going to be a gauge of how, if this conflict goes longer term, how much support as Trump is going to have from his own side of the aisle. By the way, a congressional official saying today the war is costing the U.S. $1 billion a day.
That certainly is going to spark much reaction, no doubt. But we appreciate your update and your insights as always. Live from the White House, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. Thank you, Mike. And now an update on I-24 News' exclusive report. Kurdish forces starting movements against Iran amid reports of American support. This exclusive report by our Yulia Pobogailova has already been matched by Fox and Axios and others. It is, in effect, going viral. An official from the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan saying Kurdish armed groups based in Iraq have already started military moves against Iranian regime forces. And according to Kurdish fighters affiliated with the Kurdistan Free Life Party, they have started taking combat positions inside Iranian territory, and that already happening on Monday. So for more reaction, it's a pleasure to welcome Kaveh Shehrouz, lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, joining us right now from Toronto. Kaveh, thank you so much for joining us. This is a developing situation, so I'd love to hear your reaction and your insights to this exclusive I-24 News report that Kurdish forces have started movements against Iran, and it's coming amidst reports of American support. Your sense, your reaction, your insight.
Very good to be with you. My reaction is quite mixed. I mean, it really depends on what will happen as a result of these Kurdish movements. If the idea is that they're going to lead a battle and begin sort of a secessionist movement or a separatist movement, obviously that's something that would be disappointing to me. And I think it would signal the beginning of a civil war. I think the Iranian regime will not look kindly upon that kind of action. I think other countries in the region will not take well to a separatist movement. But if the idea is that these Kurdish groups are going to move and open up space for the Iranian people themselves to then rise up and overthrow this regime, then I welcome it. I think the Kurds are a long persecuted minority, but they're politically organized, they're armed, and I would welcome their beginning this battle against Iran's regime.
There were already reports that the CIA was working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of helping in some kind of popular uprising in Iran. What is your sense of the support of a move like this right now? Where exactly would it come from?
Well, as I said, I think the mood in Iran generally is nationalist, and I think most people will be looking at this, if not with suspicion, then some degree of anxiety. They might worry about kind of what the incentives of the Kurds are, what their end game is. Again, if this is a move to free Iran and for the Kurds to be operating within, but while respecting the territorial integrity of Iran, I think most Iranians would welcome it. I think they would welcome any kind of help, just as most Iranians have welcomed American and Israeli help. But if this is intended as something else, as part of an effort to break away from the country, then I think there is going to probably be a lot of anger, and I think people are going to be looking at the Americans that have backed this with some degree of suspicion.
What do you make of the likely reaction out of the regime to these reports about these moves happening as we speak?
Well, the regime for a long time has been trying to paint its opposition as people that are going to either purposely or inadvertently cause the breakdown of the country and give rise to separatism. I think they're certainly going to use this for all its propaganda purposes. They're going to use this to say, we told you so, that they're trying to turn Iran into Syria. They're trying to Balkanize the country. And they may win over some supporters. That's why I think it's really important that the Americans that are backing the Kurds themselves, the Israelis, they have to be very smart about this, and they have to counter signal that their aim is not the breakup of the country, but simply to weaken Iran's regime so that Iranians can determine their own future fate.
What does this mean, these reports? What does it mean for the protesters, for all the Iranians involved in taking action against the regime? We know about the brutal crackdown in January. We know that the message, help is on its way, was made loud and clear in January. What does this kind of development mean for those people waiting to see, after all this military action, what happens next on the ground?
Well, I think Iranians, like everyone else, they're all waiting to decipher what America's motive in all this is and what their end game is. One day, the president of the United States says that he wants to overthrow this regime. Other days, he talks about possibly making a deal. I think this may, assuming that, again, this is not seen as a separatist movement, I think this will be seen as a further signal that perhaps America's goal really is to overthrow this regime. And in that case, I think it will be welcomed by the people that have so bravely fought against this regime in the streets.
Which brings me to the next question. The supreme leader, firstly, we're hearing the funeral has been postponed. One wonders why. The next supreme leader, so many questions remain. We know that there are meetings virtually to select a new leader after the elimination of the Ayatollah. But at the start of this joint US-Israel operation, he was eliminated. Now questions are being asked about Mojtaba, his son. What is your sense? What can you tell us? What role could he potentially play down the line?
Well, Mojtaba has always been seen as basically a front runner for this role, but I think he probably imagined himself inheriting this role in a very different way in different circumstances. By all accounts, Mojtaba is incredibly hardline. I think he is probably going to follow his father's policy of not making any sort of concessions to the Americans and wanting to fight on. But I suspect that if this battle continues and if the regime's back is against the wall and its survival is at stake, then he, like everyone else, may be tempted to make a deal with the Americans.
And certainly the concern remains, no less, that the ideology remains the same, father and son, but he is not the only contender. Israel has warned that any new leader would be an unequivocal target for elimination. What is your sense? What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that anyone that takes this role is going to be looking over their shoulder. They know well the fate of the previous supreme leader, and they know that there's been incredible infiltration in the ranks of the Iranian regime. You know, a lot of these folks seem to be working with the Mossad. So I think they're going to have to take extraordinary security measures. They may have to go underground. I think whatever power this new supreme leader has is going to be curtailed because they're not going to be able to do things the usual way. But ultimately, I think it will really depend on how long this bombing campaign goes on for and how successful the Americans are at degrading the Iranian regime's power to fight back and impose a cost on the Americans and on other countries in the region.
Over and above the developments on the ground with the Kurds, over and above the developments in the air with the military strikes, my final question, the name Reva Pahlavi, what does it mean potentially down the line? So many questions, so much speculation, your thoughts and insights.
Well, Reza Pahlavi seems to be the man of the hour, and he seems to have a fair bit of support in the diaspora. I think it's fair to say that he has a fair bit of support in Iran, though that's harder to gauge. What he doesn't really have is much organization. I mean, the Kurds are smaller in number, but they're armed and they're very, very organized. I think Mr. Pahlavi has for a long time thought that he could alone bring down this regime and lead the transition. I frankly am very skeptical of that. I think he's going to have to learn to share power. He's going to have to build a coalition that brings in different constituencies.
Certainly appreciate your insights and your time. Kaveh Sheruz, lawyer and senior fellow at the MacDonald Laurier Institute, live from Toronto. Thank you very much for being with us on this breaking news edition.
Thank you.
Dan Perry, your response.
Reza Pahlavi is a super interesting figure. He's the son of the former monarch, in effect, and you'd think he may have monarchic intent. I interviewed him just over a year ago for quite some time, and he struck me as an aspiring Democrat and not aspiring monarch, actually. He, I think, would like to lead a transition regime, and I suspect he would then run in the elections that followed, and I don't know if he would win those elections. Depends what else emerges in Iran. But he could play a positive role. My understanding is Trump is not necessarily enamored of Pahlavi. Maybe he feels he's too big for his britches.
He did say he's a nice guy.
He did say he's a nice guy.
Some people like him.
Yeah. No, it's some people like him, yes. I think Trump is maintaining all options open, and it is remarkable how we're in a point in history where despite the fact that the American Constitution and American founders did not want an imperial presidency, everything comes down to Trump. There's a fork in the road right now. One direction is a pause in the war and an attempt to domesticate the potentially terrified new leaders, whoever they are. And then Trump would do a deal, and a lot of people would tell you that deal would involve sanctions relief, and it would give this terrible regime more life, but maybe they would behave better externally. Down the other path lies a genuine attempt to bring down the regime, and I suspect, I can't prove it, but I suspect that the spectacular success of the first 24 hours is giving Trump a temptation to try to do something historic. He's been bragging a lot in the past year and a half, and a lot of people think it looks ridiculous. Here would be a chance to achieve something that is not at all ridiculous. It would be truly historic, and if he succeeds in doing this, he might just, ironically, win, I don't know if the Nobel Prize, but many other prizes. It would be spectacular.
Certainly more things in Israel be named after him than already are. Look, I agree with your read of Trump, Dan. One of the reasons I think Trump may have been wishy-washy about explaining what the rationale and the goals of the war were is that he wanted to wait and see what kinds of opportunities would develop and what could be possible and what could be achieved based on what he saw on the ground and, let's be honest, from the air. As for the Kurds, we heard from our guest a really interesting explanation to your question, Benita. He would support, even as a mainstream Iranian who's not Kurdish, would support this move if it were balanced by other Kurdish commitments, right? So if it's seen as a tool to bring down the regime, but on the other hand, the Kurds commit not to having separatist ambitions, he would support it. That's a narrow path. It will be interesting over the next 24 hours to hear from the Kurds, hopefully to I-24 News, for them to tell us what their intentions are and what their goals are and what their signaling is to the Iranian public. Because Trump has obviously made a calculated decision that seems to have been well thought out beforehand, that he would rather throw the kitchen sink at the Iranians, even at the risk of hurting his coalition. This is going to hurt his coalition with Turkey, his coalition with the Iranian public, and maybe with other actors.
It might not, because the fact is, even countries that have claimed to be against this and that were skeptical about the use of American power, and even Western European countries that speak of legitimacy, are actually in favor.
That's correct. But this move is not a move many of those countries will support. And therefore, it endangers breaking up what has already been built, albeit been built in many cases because of the Iranians' high risk, high reward that they didn't get, decision to attack the Gulf states. But this could undermine some of that support. That seems to be the calculated risk that American and Israeli planners are taking in order to throw everything they have at the regime and worry about the internal contradictions of the strategy later.
Here's a possibility that may seem fantastical, but I'm prepared to put it on the table and we'll see what happens. Clearly, the Americans right now, given that they're paying a price, but a tolerable price for this war, are inclined to go as far as they can in degrading the military capability of the regime, not only to lash out at others, but also to oppress their own population. In time, 3, 4, 5 weeks, they could be so weakened that terms of surrender might be dictatable. And I would say...
That is what Pete Hegseth was essentially saying at his press conference.
The question is what those terms might be.
That is, of course, a best-case scenario for the Americans' perspective.
The question is what those terms might be. And we're generally accustomed to speaking of the nuclear file, the ballistic missile file, and and demanding an end to all support for the proxies. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if a fourth demand entered the table, which is a transition to a different kind of regime in Iran. For example, ending the clerical vetting of presidential candidates, re-empowering the parliament to actually run the country. And I couldn't tell you that the son of Khamenei is going to agree to this, but maybe the third or fourth Ayatollah in line just might. Because the idea
but you're in a world where the regime is still on its legs.
To that point.
If I may,
which is a possibility.
Gentlemen, we talked about what the Kurds are saying. So they're not talking to I-24 News, not to Fox News, not to Axios. They're keeping it local to Kurdish media. But Iraq's Kurdistan Democratic Party, one of the largest political groups of the Kurds in Iraq, saying they have nothing to do with this reporting. They have nothing to do with this offensive, saying that, quote, the Kurdistan region is not part of this war. It urged the Iraqi federal government to stop militias and illegal armed groups attacking the Kurdistan region. Now, why is this important and why are they saying this? Because the Kurds, we're talking about 60 million Kurds, they're spread in 4 regions. In Western Iran, in northeast Iraq, in northeast Syria, and in southeast Turkey. The Kurds in Iraq are the only ones who have managed to establish their own autonomy, and you can see through their steps in recent months, and you can even say in recent years, that they are not going to take any step that is going to threaten that autonomy. You saw that with taking a very different voice from the Kurds in Syria, and now they are trying to distance themselves from these Iranian Kurds who have fled into Iraq, have trained and planned for this exact moment to cross back into Iran and to try and undermine the regime. And so if we are seeing American coordination or American consultation discussing with the Kurdish leadership, in my opinion, what the Kurds here would want to see, the Iranian Kurds, because we have to
make a distinction.
They may want to carve out a slice of Iran or even see cross-border Kurdistan state. But the Iraqi Kurds, they are very fearful that such an adventure might fail, and they will have to pay with their hard-fought autonomy. And so that explains why we're hearing this response from the Iraqi Kurds.
Dan Perry.
The Iraqi Kurds are going to be very, very careful because, of course, indeed, they have at some cost carved out their own autonomy. And the issue now becomes Turkey. America, too, wants to see Turkey on side in this war. And more or less, they have that, despite Turkey's on and again, off again, somewhat closeness to the Ayatollah regime. But nothing would upset Turkey more than seeing the already offensive to them Iraqi Kurdistan trying to unite with an Iranian Kurdistan, because then they would absolutely envision a conspiracy where next is the adjacent Turkish Kurdistan, and that would make Turkey an enemy of this whole enterprise. So this has to be handled with the greatest conceivable delicacy.
I think that may explain the ballistic missile that Iran launched to Turkey today, trying to signal to them, you are stakeholders in this war as well. This might end up affecting you, and so you need to pressure Washington to stop this. That is my explanation to why Iran launched a ballistic missile.
The U.S. and Israel, maybe more through circumstances and Iranian miscalculations or taking a high-risk strategy that didn't work, have built a very, very fragile and very broad coalition. And this move of supporting armed Kurdish militias going into Iran, and this is yet another example, risks breaking apart this coalition, which could affect the possibilities of success. Where are your chances of success better? By maximizing the number of guns you have fighting Iranian soldiers, or by maximizing the extent of diplomatic support you have around the region, around the world? It's an open question. We're about to find out the answer.
And if we can throw in one other open question into the mix, I know we're short on time. If the Iranian Kurds based in Iraq are getting involved alongside the U.S., doing a lot of the dirty work on the ground, they must have demanded significant assurances on the part of the Trump administration, especially following the bad taste that was left in what happened in Syria with the complete abandonment of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led forces there, basically handing over all their territory to the Ashara government there.
30 seconds, parting thoughts on the changing dynamics that this development could have on the region, briefly.
Well, it's what we're discussing here. This is becoming a regional war, not quite yet a world war, but if you take into account that, in fact, Iran is backed by Russia, China, and you know what, throw in North Korea, it's starting to look like an Axis versus the Allies, and it is quite remarkable that the Allies means the U.S., the West, the Arabs, and Israel.
We already have a war.
And the Kurds.
And the Kurds, who, by the way, would have the Americans being indebted to them.
Dan Perry, Ariel Oseran, Owen Alterman, so many open questions, but a massive development. I-24 News exclusive report. Thank you very much to our Yulia Pobogalova for bringing us this new development, much reaction already across the globe. And that is a wrap for this Breaking News edition. You can, of course, follow us for more on all these stories on social media and check out our live English broadcast lineup for this week, bringing you updated war coverage. We start our broadcast at 4 p.m. Israel time, continue at 6, then 8, and then we have this 2-hour special at 10 p.m. That is 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching.